Another kind of a money market instrument is a repurchase agreement, or I would say a reverse repo. Well, I to a layman, it's not very useful, but I would still touch on this because it is very important to the banks in which you have your money. So indirectly, it'll affect us for sure. It's a reverse repo is a short-term agreement to purchase securities in order to sell them back at a slightly higher price. Repos and reverse repos are short-term borrowing or lending, and they're generally overnight. But they are short-term and borrowing and lending. The borrower are generally the approved list of the central bank, RBI in our case. So generally, the borrowers are these big banks that where you have your money, like HSBC, um, ICICI, etc. And who is the lender? It's our very own central bank, RBI. So these transactions are generally carried out between both of them. They are short-term borrowings and lendings, often overnight. And the main reason why you have this reverse repo and repo is central bank. When the central bank sees that it wants to infuse money in the market, it wants to. So it's a part of a monetary policy. When you want to have a lot of liquidity in the market, like at right now, this is the time where the economy is going completely down. We want to infuse money, you want to infuse jobs in the market. Reverse repo is one such agreement, one such which will help giving liquidity in the market. Banks can borrow money from central bank or for maybe overnight in return of a certain interest or a higher price they'll give back, and that money then banks can further use to give it out loans to people, etc. So it's just a way, it's a platform, it's a way, it's an instrument for RBI to infuse money in the market. So these were few, I wouldn't say there are a lot of other money market instruments, but these are the few basic and the most common money market instruments that we hear of. Then I go on to capital markets. In capital markets, I divided it into primary markets and secondary markets. Primary markets, as I said, is the initial push and the raise that's required. So here, the kind of instruments are an IPO that I'd already touched upon before, like there's a family business. They don't want to increase the debt. Rather, they are ready to give up a certain percentage of equity in return of uh, cash. So for that, and they want to go, they need that, so they can give their equity in return of cash through two platforms: public equity or private equity. Private equity is when you go to venture capitalists or privately you are raising funds by giving up a certain percentage of your equity to venture capitalists or certain other market players of a private equity market. Public equity is when you're ready to give a certain percentage of your equity, of your shareholding, sorry, to the public, to anyone in general, right? In return of an infused capital. For that, there'll be underwriters, there'll be bankers, there'll be a lot of other players, there'll be the board of directors effectively getting you an entire IPO agreement before you finally ring the bell at NSE and BSE and come officially start trading in the secondary market, right? So that for that initial push, you have to go through the primary market. And furthermore, suppose if I give you an example that there is a company right now 100% owned by a family business, and generally in India what happens in an IPO is the families don't want to give up on the majority stake is 51% because then their voting rights go away from them. So if the company decides that 30% of their equity they are ready to give it, right, to an IPO to the public, they prepare the documents, they ring the bell at NSE, BSE, and now out they are. Now the shares are traded in the secondary market. And not only the shares, various options on the shares are traded. So in the secondary market, but furthermore, now they need more capital. So they'll go on to further issuing of capital. They want to forego another 10% of their stake, keep 60% with themselves, 40 they want to give it to the market. Again, for that, they have to go through primary markets. Then there's rights issues for firm allotments, offer to public, even for bonds, if they have to issue, they have to go through a primary market for doing of any kind of these instruments that they want to issue. Then let's divide our secondary market into debt and equity. There are certain instruments which are debt. Debt instruments, like I explained before, are instruments which are fixed income instruments. The return on them is fixed, whereas equity instruments are variable income instruments. The return on them will vary. In return, you're getting a certain ownership of a company. In debt, you've loaned out your money and getting a fixed return. Well, it's already 12:15. I think I would be taking another 15 minutes of yours. So by 1:45, I would say we can end this session, because I'll need another half an hour, 15 minutes over the committed timeline, over the committed timeline of 90 minutes, if that's okay. But the most interesting bit is towards the end. So I would request you all to stay tuned, because I'll be talking about the various kinds of derivatives in the end. That's one of my favorites in the end I'll be talking about. So I would request you all to stay in till then. So let's talk about the various kinds of debt instruments that we have in the financial markets. Debt instruments would be debentures, bonds, preference shares, I would say. Preference shares would be more of a hybrid instrument, I would call it like. But to give you a little bit about debt instruments, basically you are getting a fixed income in return. So like in debentures or bonds, and it's like you've given your money, loaned it out to someone in return of interest and principal amount when you get it back. So debentures are unsecured debt instruments. They are not secured by collateral, and returns are generated from the debentures are thus dependent on issuer's credibility. When you are going into debentures, you are very sure you're going to get a fixed return. You're very sure you're going to get a fixed return after some point of time, but you never know, there is a counterparty risk of default, and there's no collateral, nothing put in aside in case you default. This will be given to you. Nothing is given to you in aside. So make sure that the company that you want to take the debentures of is very credible. Bonds are basically contract between two parties. Bonds can be between anything. It can be a government bond, it can be company issues, anyone can issue bonds. These are financial instruments. It's a contract between two parties, allowing the entity to secure its large amount of funds this way. Investors are paid interest at fixed intervals, and principal is repaid on maturity. So it is like a loan, but it's a bond. It's a debt instrument. Generally, government bonds are the safest. As I explained, we have central government. Your money is safe with us. Your money is safe with the government. That's what central government claims. And that's the fact. Because in the stable country, it's not going to default, the government. So you have government bonds. But again, if you have government bonds, the interest rates will not be as high or as attractive as a company that issues its bond. Companies will issue bonds to raise capital, and in their balance sheets, it'll go under debt. It won't go under equity. It'll be a debt that in a certain amount of time, where whatever your contract is, you are repaying the principal amount, and after every few months, maybe a quarter or maybe monthly, you are paying interest. Bonds are generally backed by the assets of the issuer. So there is collateral in bonds, whereas debentures are not secured. Debentures are not secured. Sometimes you can also say that every debenture is a bond. The bonds that are not secured can be termed as debentures, but not all bonds are debentures. The bonds that are backed by the assets will not come under debentures. Next, let's come on to even preference shares. Preference shares are, I would say, I can call it like a hybrid security. I can call it like a convertible debenture. Even a convertible debenture would be a hybrid security. So if I've divided my instruments into debt, equity, and hybrid securities, debt would be mainly debentures and bonds. Preference shares or convertible debentures would be mainly hybrid securities, and equity would be a simple equity that is allowing the company to raise finance by giving a certain percentage of their power, their holdings, right? We can have private equity, public equity, as I explained, and also they become very much owners of your company. Even if you hold a share of a company, you become an owner to the company. You have various rights like voting rights and other rights other than getting dividends. Not and dividends on a normal equity, dividend on a preference share will always be first will always be given preference, like the name suggests, than a normal equity. Now that's equity. Now let's talk about a little bit of hybrid securities. Hybrid securities would be a mix of equity and debt, like preference shares. So preference shares is you're getting, the name is suggesting, you are being preferred than a normal equity shareholder. Why? Because you have partial ownership of the company. You will always have a preferential cumulative dividend or coupon rate when declared. So at the time of solvency, you are preferred than the equity shareholders, and your dividends are always preferred if the company. Remember, any publicly listed company is not allowed. It's not obligated to give the dividends. It's an option. So in preference shares, their dividends are always preferred than a normal shareholder. But again, what are you going? What is the backdrop? In equity, the return is more lucrative than preference shares because it's got a bit of a debt instrument also in it. Preference shares do not enjoy voting rights. Their dividends are given first. They claim to have a greater claim on the company's assets than common stockholders, right? But and generally the minimum redemption period is of 20 years. Similarly, like that, we have convertible debentures. That is, debenture is like a loan, debt on security. So you have given someone has bought a convertible debentures of, say, Reliance. So for the first 10 years, convertible debentures of 10 years. So for the first 10 years, it's getting its fixed interest rates. But at the 10 year, when the 10 years, the maturity period comes, it's got an option that do you want to become a shareholder? Do you want to convert yourself, like the name is suggesting, convert and become a shareholder, or do you want to get your money back? So that's what convertible debentures are. These are hybrid securities. We're mixing debt and equity. Now let's talk about the most interesting bit of this module, which are derivatives. As I said before, that there is a market, an entire market called the derivative market. And I told you that we'll be going on, we'll be explaining that in detail later part of that module. And now it's come. So let's talk about derivatives, what the instruments they are, and then we'll connect them to the derivative market. Let's nicely, slowly play the game, join the dots. So what is a derivative? What instrument it is? What is the name suggesting? Derivative. It's deriving from something. That's the name. For every security, the name derives the meaning, right? So even in here, the name is derivative. It's deriving. So derivative instrument is an instrument that its value is derived from the value of one or more underlying asset. Derivative is basically it's deriving its value from one or more of its underlying asset. That underlying asset, it's that value. So it is the price of your derivative will be in direct proportion to the price of your, I wouldn't say direct because direct is a 1-to-1 proportion, but I would say it's an upward proportion to the underlying assets. Right, that the underlying asset prices are increasing, your derivative price will also increase. So it's taking its value from the underlying asset, right? And the asset cannot just be stocks. It can be stocks, it can be commodities, it can be currencies, it can be bonds, it can be anything. It can even be stock indices. It can even be the NYC or anything. It can be, it's not necessarily supposed to be a share of a company, or it's not necessarily supposed to be a bond of a company. You can also do a derivative on an oil, anything. And derivatives, again, can be traded over the counter or an exchange. Over the counter constitute a greater proportion of the derivative market, but even exchange, there's a complete set of derivative markets, and there are proper exchanges where you can exchange your derivative products, which are listed. In over the counter, as I explained, there is a higher counterparty risk because the person can run away. There are no regulations. It's a decentralized platform. Derivatives are exchanged very heavily on standardized platforms also, and they are very heavily regulated due to the complex structure they have. I will go through the 4 most common derivatives that we hear: forwards, futures, swaps, options, and I'll also go through some complex derivatives like straddles and butterfly spreads. So let's talk about forwards. What is my name suggesting? Forward. Forward means something you're looking forward to, something in the future, right? As the name suggests, something in the future, something forward. That's exactly what this derivative instrument is. It's a contract which is customized between two parties to buy and sell a specific asset at a specified price on a future date. Let's give a very basic example. Today, the gold price is around 49,000 or 50,000 for 10 grams of gold. I have a feeling that the gold price will become 90,000 after 2 years. So, June 2020, I have a feeling the gold price in June 2022 will become 90,000. I talked to my friend. My friend feels that the price of the gold will become 30,000. My friend feels that no, the price will actually reduce, become 30,000. So, for her, so we both entered into a contract that in June 2020, in June today, June 2020, I've entered a contract with a very close friend of mine that 10 grams of gold I will buy from you for 90,000 rupees in June 2022. That's a contract. I have fixed my future date that in on 30th June 2022, I am going to buy 10 grams of gold from you. I have fixed the date, I have fixed the commodity, and I have fixed the price that 90,000 rupees, or I would say I will buy it from you at 50,000 rupees. I won't say 90,000, I'll again buy it for 50,000 rupees, I've said, right? So I have specified the price 50,000 rupees. I've specified the date June 2022, 30th June 2022, and I have entered into a contract of 10 grams of gold with her. I am happy that in June 2022, the price of the gold will become 90,000 and I'll be able to buy it for 50,000 from her then. She, in her mind, is very happy entering the contract of selling from her side because she feels that the gold of rate will be 30,000 in June 2022 and she'll be able to sell it. She'll be able to buy it from the market for 30,000 and sell it at 50,000 to me, earning 20,000 rupees. So we both are living in our beautiful bubbles that I am speculating on what I feel will happen. She is speculating on what she feels that happen. And we both have agreed and we've come on this contract. This contract is not regulated by anyone. It's not a centralized platform. It's a decentralized OTC market. So it's an over-the-counter forward contract I've entered with. The future price for 50,000 in 2022 when I'll be buying or selling from her is my forward price. And the future date is my forward date, right? That's as simple as a forward contract. That this was a forward contract. So forward contracts are over the counter. You can do it with anyone on a future date at a future price and any commodity. I have taken 10 grams of gold. Someone can do it on maybe Reliance shares. Someone can do it on maybe Reliance bonds, anything. Now comes June 2022. The price of gold has gone to 1,20,000 rupees, way higher. I am very happy that I'll be able to buy gold from my friend at 50,000 rupees. My friend's really upset because she's losing a lot of money. So what she does is she doesn't pick up my calls. She runs away. She goes. There is a risk of default. And while entering to this contract, I gave her a certain advance. So my money is lost. The advance is lost. Not necessary you have to give advance, but maybe your contract, some people do to, it's a word of mouth, whatever. So in that, it can be a word of mouth, it can be a certain advance, it can be a certain token, whatever their money was. Oh, someone might pay the entire amount in advance. It's a completely over the counter product. So it's a decentralized market. So I can make whatever regulations around my contract. But my money is lost now. She's not picking up my calls. So a forward contract has a very high risk of default. Very high. Because one party or the other party will be a winner and one party will be a loser, right? And how is a forward a derivative contract? Because forward is the contract. I have entered into a forward contract with her by paying a certain premium, the amount of the contract. The forward contract, the price of the forward contract, it's deriving from my underlying asset, which was 10 grams of gold. So if I've entered into a contract of 50,000 rupees of buying gold in future from her, the premium that I'm paying, my forward contract is worth maybe 10,000 rupees or whatever. So that money I've lost, and that forward contract price will increase or decrease depending on my underlying asset. Now, since this was an over counter product, the risk of default is very high. How about I take this forward contract on a listed exchange? If I take it on a listed exchange, it becomes completely regulated. It becomes on a centralized platform. So my counterparty risk of default is much less because I have a regulator in between. So then that is what we call is a future. Forward contract, which is listed on a exchange, is called a future. There is no difference between a forward and a future contract other than the fact that forward contract is an over-the-counter derivative product, futures is a listed derivative product. Futures have a regulator in between. So when I'm dealing with futures, again, it's a legal agreement to buy or sell a particular commodity at a predetermined price and a pre-specified time. It's the same definition as a forward, other than the fact that it is a listed product. So the quantity, the prices, the timeline, that is all, there are standardized contracts that are made. The buyer of that contract just has to choose which contract the buyer wants to buy, will buy. The seller of the contract wants to choose which contract he wants to sell. And when there's a buyer who's ready to buy that certain contract and there's a seller who's ready to sell that contract, the centralized platform makes them meet. As simple as that. It is traded. It is to trade exchanges in future with a less risk of default. Now, how in a future will the risk of default become less than a forward? A person in a future can also do the same thing what the person in the forward do, like my friend did. My friend didn't pick up my call. She ran away when the price of gold increased and she had to sell it to me for 50,000. So even in the future, the person can do that. Well, the person cannot do that because there are margin accounts that come to take place in a kind of a future contract. Margin contracts will do a daily settlement between the buyer and the seller with the price difference of that commodity that they are dealing with. The daily settlement of that price difference will go in the accounts of the buyer or the seller. So any time in between when the buyer or the seller defaults, at least up to that day, your money is safe with you. You're not losing anything. But the only thing is, since it is listed on an exchange, there will be a premium that you have to pay for it because you are securing your default risk. So margin accounts will help you save your money because it is highly regulated, and every day the net settlement of that price of that commodity is being adjusted between the buyer or seller. Let's give an example again of that 50,000 gold. Now me and my friend have come on this listed platform. Tomorrow the gold price becomes 60,000 rupees, which is unlikely, a 10,000 jump, but I'm just giving you broad figures. So for that one day, I have earned 10,000, she loses 10,000. So from her margin account to my margin account, 10,000, the difference will be transferred. And that difference, due to the fluctuating nature of the commodities or the instruments that we are dealing with, every day that settlement will be happening on margin accounts. If at the end of the maturity of the future contract and the end of the maturity of the forward contract, none of the parties default, the price, the value of that contract, of the underlying instrument, and what the person gains from the future contract and what the person gains from the forward contract would be exactly the same if we have two identical forward and future contracts and none of them defaults. Then the value of the underlying asset and what the person actually gains from the value of the underlying asset and what the other person actually loses from the value of the underlying asset will be the same. The margin accounts in future contracts just helps you with not having that counterparty default risk. And that's why it's on a listed exchange. Then let's come on to options. Options. What are options? It's a very common term used by companies, very common terms used by banks, very common term used by financiers to say, you know what, you can trade on an option. What is an option? The name is suggesting the definition. Option is giving the buyer of the contract the right It's not an obligation, it's an option. The buyer of the contract is it's giving him the right to sell or buy the underlying asset at a specified price during a specified time. So let's do a certain thing. Okay, I have 10 shares. I have promised my friend, or let's not talk about that. Let's now start talking a little on a financial terms and try. Let me give you a very simple example of this. I am seeing the stock market every day, and I feel that Reliance prices will rise, right? I feel today Reliance has a price of 50 rupees, and I know that in the next 1 year, exactly 1 year from now, it'll become 100 rupees. I can keep on, I might just buy it right now and keep on waiting that, and I've bought my 50 rupees Reliance shares right now. Now, I keep on waiting. When it becomes 100, I'll sell them off. That's my one simple thing. But there is a risk to this. The risk is that I feel that the risk is that the price can go down also, right? So in that case, it's a very simple scenario. I am buying a share and I'm waiting for the prices to increase and then I'll sell it. So as simple as that. But there is a risk that the market might go volatile and the prices will go down. And I'll lose my money when I'll be selling my share for 50 rupees. Now it's worth only 20 and I lose my money. If I don't want to have this risk of volatility that the market is going up, down, I can enter into an option contract. Option is giving me the right that in future, if I have bought an option, please be very careful. I'm buying an option to sell the shares. I'm buying a put option. My option, I'm still buying my contract. The contract, basic contract is of an option that I am buying. But my contract says that in future, I will sell Reliance shares at 100 rupees on this day or before this day. It's giving me that option to sell. Then, so this, I don't have to sell my shares. I don't have to. It's giving me an option. If I feel that, okay, the prices have gone really down and in future it'll go up, I'll hold on to my shares. I'm not obligated. In a forward or a future contract, you are obligated to sell. If I would have entered into a forward contract with my friend that on this date I will have to sell 100, I'll have to sell you Reliance shares for 100 rupees, I will have to do it. I'll be in a loss. But in an option, the buyer has the right, not an obligation, to buy or sell any underlying security at a specified price during a specified time. American options can be exercised anytime before the expiry of the option, whereas European options can be only exercised at the time of expiry. There are two kinds of options, call and put. Put gives you an option to sell your assets at an agreed price at a particular date. Call gives you an option to buy your asset at an agreed price at a particular date. So call is when you're expecting that the prices will get low, then you go on a call, you buy a call option. When you expect the prices will rise, then you enter into a put option. These derivatives are deriving from the value of the underlying assets. So if my value of my Reliance share, my underlying asset is my Reliance share, it's going down, the price by which I'll be buying and selling my contract, I'm talking about the main contract, that will also fluctuate, right? So a person can immediately just buy your shares, keep holding on to them, waiting for 100 rupees price to increase to sell them, or keeping on waiting for n number of time to sell them whenever. But in an option, you're not obligated. It is an option for you. If you are entering into a contract with the seller, equity is a very simple term. Equity is buying the shares of there's nothing deriving, right? Equity is just buying the shares. You might also hold on to your Reliance shares. If, okay, it hasn't touched 100, it's touched 20. You might just hold on and wait for it to touch. But that's a very simple trading. But if you want to It's a simple trading. You're not earning money from them, but speculators in the market who want to really earn money by buying low, selling high, and they want to earn that money, they enter into option contracts because they are so short that, okay, the price will increase. So let me enter into an option telling my person that I am going to be selling my shares to you at 100 rupees. If he would have entered into a forward contract, if he's so sure, he'll be winning that money if the price of Reliance increases. But God forbid the market becomes volatile and his prices go, the prices of his underlying asset goes down. Then in an option he gets the right that he might not want to exercise his option. That's what it is all about. In an option, it's a derivative, the options, which is the derivative contract. Now it is saving you, it's giving you a kind of cushioning from the volatility market, right? From the risk of volatile market. So for that, you'll have to pay a premium. So your net profit or loss when you're coming into the trading of an option will be minus the premium you pay on the options. That'll always be the case. Then we have other kind of an instrument, a derivative instrument, which is swaps. Swap is when you enter a derivative contract through two parties exchange cash flows or liabilities from different financial instruments. So what a very common swap example I'll give you is an interest rate swap. Suppose I have a loan and I am getting a fixed interest rate of 100 rupees every month. And there's another person who has a loan and he is getting a volatile interest rate. Sometimes he gets 140 rupees, sometimes he gets a 90 rupees interest, right? So what we can do is I can swap the cash flows. I'm swapping the underlying cash flow. I get the variable interest rate amount, he gets the fixed rate interest rate amount, and in the end, both of us get our principal amounts. So that kind of an agreement, if you're going on the underlying cash flows, that would be a swap. Most swaps involve cash flow based on a principal amount, such as a loan or a bond. Although instruments can be anything, but most commonly are these interest rate swaps. Each cash flow compromises of one leg. One cash flow is generally fixed, other is variable, like I explained, and you can get into you can get into a transaction of that. You can have a floating currency exchange rate swaps also, where you can exchange, you can hedge. The swaps are very used for currency hedging. You can do that. Swaps are mostly over the counter contracts because they're a little more detailed and they are a little more complex to be standardized. So most of them are traded over the counter. Then you have some complex derivatives like a straddle. Straddle would be if I am getting a call option, that is option to buy the security. So if I have a security, I would again say, let's say I have a Reliance share. So I again am protecting myself from the volatility of the market, and I'm not sure that the prices will increase or decrease. But short return I want to get. Straddle would be a safe bet because you are going to stimulously buy a call option and you will buy a put option. The option to sell the security, that's a put option, and the option to buy the security, that's a call option. You are going to buy both these options of the same underlying stock with the same expiry rate, the same strike price. As long as the underlying stock is moving very sharply high or very sharply low, you will get your money. Straddle is a very safe option. So you are betting on the underlying stock and you're betting against the volatility of the market because you're going to buy both the call option, the option to buy the security, the put option, the option to sell the security, the same security at the same price and at the same maturity period. So when there'll be a very sharp increase in the underlying stock or a very sharp decrease in the underlying stock is where you earn your money. Other than that, you're any which way in a very safe zone. You're not losing anything else other than your premium amount. So that comes to almost the end of our lecture. I have given you a broad overview of what the financial markets are, given you a little bit flavoring of what the various instruments are. So just the last 2 points that I would quickly touch upon are the market players, which is who are the people who are playing in this market, who are the people who are dealing in this market, the hedgers, the arbitragers, and the speculators. These are the three. There are other also. There are margin traders, there are investment bankers, there are a lot of other players in the market. But all the investment bankers, institutions, individuals, and all, I can divide them into mainly three: speculators, arbitragers, and hedgers. Speculators are, they are following the stock every day, every day, every day, and they feel that, you know what, the stock price will increase, and if they feel the stock price will increase, they'll buy today. If they feel the stock price will decrease, they'll sell in the future, or they might sell today and earn the money. They might short. So the main motive of these speculators are to earn profit. Then the other part is arbitragers. Arbitragers are, they have sophisticated financial knowledge, and they are earning their profit from market inefficiencies. So market inefficiencies would be like, there is a bubble, the price of a certain stock, Reliance, is actually 100 rupees, but because everyone is buying, the price has touched 150. Arbitragers knows that the market always corrects itself, and that's a law. That's a law of, I think, the world. The world is healing itself now, right? That the market always corrects itself. So the arbitragers know that the price will come back to 100, so they will sell at 150. They'll go against what the normal layman individuals are doing. Those are the arbitrages. They are earning from the profit of the market inefficiencies. And then there are these hedgers. Hedgers are basically, they are reducing the risk of volatility. They are trying to hedge their trade. Like if they are entering into a trade, suppose I'm entering into a trade in US, in a US company. I know the company is going to do really well. I know the prices will increase. I've bought the price. I've bought the shares. I know things are going to go amazing. I'm very sure. But how sure I am that my exchange rate will be as good as what it is today? Maybe there's a war between US and India, and the exchange rates are different. Maybe it could, and I might lose all my money just because, though I've invested in a very good company in USA, but I've lost all my money just because that of the currency exchange rate. So I'll hedge against the exchange rate of the US and India exchange rate, the currency pair. I'll hedge, I'll protect myself against the price volatility of the exchange rate. Most common instruments in hedging is forex market. So that brings us to almost the end of the lecture today. Before I sum it all up, we've actually just completed at 12:45 p.m. I'll just let you know a little. I'll just take another minute or two just to touch on mutual funds and hedge funds. I would strongly recommend all of you to attend the next 5-6 days of our finance modules, because we have a very intellectual mentors like Madhav, Pranjal, Sarthak, and they will tell you all about the details about private equity markets, mutual funds, hedge funds. But just for them, I'll give a little bit overview, a bit of definition of what mutual funds are and what hedge funds are. Basically, it's a fund. What is the name? Fund, where everything is coming together. So it's a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and instruments. Mutual funds gives small individual investors access to a diversified portfolio. Like you say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's giving you an access for a normal individual to secure his money in a diverse portfolio at a certain price. Mutual funds are divided into various categories, and they generally charge a fees. So Madhav, he is already heading one of these very good Bharat Bhushan company funds, which deals with various mutual funds and hedge funds, and he will charge a very nominal little commission for the funds that you'll invest with him. So that is a commission that any broker, not just Madhav, any other broker, to be, for example, charge, right? So mutual funds will charge an annual fee. So it's like the expenses, or like the effort they're putting in for your money. And it's really it's a really nice security for a person who wants a nice retirement plan. Hedge funds, on the other hand, it's very similar to mutual funds. It's got, again, a funding pool of a variety of instruments, but the goal is to maximize the return of the customer portfolio. And here the customers are very high net worth individuals. So the returns, it's a little riskier than mutual funds. The return, these market players are betting on a little more risky assets because they want to give better returns to their high net worth individuals, and the high net worth individuals are already informed about it. The high net worth individuals, the HNIs, want a higher interest rate. They want a higher return and they are ready to take the risk. Maybe because they already have a pool of money that they've already secured, and now this pool of money that they are gambling on, they know that these hedge funds capabilities are so good and they're going to get a higher return. But again, there will be a disclaimer signed that there is a chance that the money can be lost in the market. At the end of the day, you're trading in the market. The money can be lost. But generally, this is a little more riskier than mutual funds, and they will be also a little more expensive because there'll be a little more aggressive trading happening on them, and a lot of everyday trading will be, everyday markets are followed. Even in mutual funds, markets are followed, but here it's compromising of less risky assets. Here it's compromising on a little more risky assets. Mutual funds, generally they charge 2% for asset management and 20% of your overall profits as fees. So it's a little more expensive also in terms of fees and commission as compared to hedge funds. They have an exponential growth curve. In the last 20 years, we have seen hedge funds rise in India a lot. That we have seen, even mutual funds have become very popular over the past few years, but mutual funds are more for a person who wants to secure his retirement. Hedge funds are more for a high net individual who wants a little higher return for a little bit more risk he's taking with very knowledgeable individuals. So now that brings me to the end of this session. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and I hope I've tried to explain you in very simple terms, and I've tried to introduce you to the world of finance, those who are not part of this world. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the modules as well. I'm happy to take any questions if you have, though I would strongly recommend you to wait for the rest of the modules, listen to our other interactive speakers, and then ask your questions, because I don't want to take away their wind from them, the excitement when what they have to share for the rest of the for all these subjects in detail. But happy to answer any questions. You can even email me, you can even discuss with me, we can have another one-to-one Zoom call if that pleases, to answer any of your questions. Could you explain futures and options in relation to the oil market? That's very interesting. That would require at least an hour more. Definitely, I can, and we can have a one-on-one discussion with this, surely. So if you want, you can send in your email ID and we can discuss that, Ayush. Simran, definitely you can get in touch with me over email. And thank you so much for appreciating the session. Can you explain okay, fine. Deepa has asked me if I can explain the discount-based time value of money. Deepa, over the call, I can only explain a little bit, which I'll try and explain over again right now to you. But you can get in touch with me for the details of that, because it'll require me to make a little bit of diagrams for you. But basically, I would give you a very simple way. Your future cash, if you divide it by 1 plus interest rate raised to the power time value of money, that is what your discount flow cash flow is. So if I give you an example, 100 rupees you are having in 2021, 100 rupees today will become 1000 rupees, right? I'm just giving you a perfectly world example, right? So 100 rupees is equal to 1000 rupees divided by 1 plus, in a perfectly world environment, that would be inflation rate or the interest rate. So 1 plus the interest rate raised to the power the time. So if I'm looking at 1 year, it'll be raised to the power time. That is the discount based on time value of money. Money today and money tomorrow. 100 rupees today is not same as 100 rupees tomorrow. 100 rupees today is equal to 1000 rupees divided by your inflation rate raised to the power the time. That's the discounting factor, that you have to discount the factor. You have to discount the you have to take into factor two things: interest rate as well as the time. So that's where I'm discounting. I'm discounting it the 1 plus R. R is which is in percentage. Suppose it's a 10% inflation rate, which is, or maybe 2%. 2% should be an ideal inflation rate as per Keynesian economic method. So it's 1 plus 2%. So that's 1.02 raised to the power. If I'm guessing for a year, for a 2 year, raised to the power that year. If it's 1 year, it'll be 1. If it's 2 years, it's 2. If you're doing it in terms of months, you can do 12 months, you can do 24 months. 24 divided by 12, that should be done. If you're doing for about 1.5 years, it has to be 1.5. That would be your money today. So 1,000 rupees tomorrow, 1 year back, 1 year later, at a 2% inflation rate would be 1,000 rupees divided by 1 plus 2%, that is 1.02 raised to the power, not the complete thing, only the interest rate, the denominator raised to the power 1. So if I'm saying 1,000 rupees after 2 years, what's the price of 1,000 rupees after 2 years today with a 2% inflation rate? It will be 1,000 rupees divided by 1 plus 2%, only 1 plus 2% raised to the power 2. And you can get in touch to me a little more in detail. I'll give you a lot of examples, because if you change your interest, then the formula changes. If you want to compound it, then it changes also. You can even change your principal amounts in that case. Okay, so I've had a question from Deepa again, if I can explain the role of underwriters and the process of underwriting briefly. So the underwriters are usually banks. I'll explain you just in a minute or so for that. Underwriters are usually banks, and they come into picture at the time of an IPO. So they are at the time of an IPO, when the entire file of the IPO is being processed, is when they come, and they are also coming as a in case, suppose the shares of the company, the company is very much happy. There's one X company and it's really happy getting into an IPO, and it's selling about, it plans to sell about 1,000 shares at 10 rupees. That's a very small number, though it goes into percentage, and there are lakhs of shares that are being sold. But suppose, right? So there's an underwriting agreement that suppose those 1,000 shares are not being sold in the market. Underwriter will also be obliged to buy a certain percentage of the shares at the time, if everything doesn't go as planned. If everything goes, so it'll at the time it's a little buffer to the company that's coming in the listed market, and they also help in the process of deciding the price at which you should launch. I can give you a little more detail on it in a one-to-one session, and you can get in touch with me, and I'll let you know the entire process of underwriting and what exactly underwriters also do. Currency markets have always been a barometer for financial market volatility. How does one manage FX hedges in the COVID world? Well, we have our 3 very good mentors, and out of which I feel Sarthak and Madhav will be enlightening you to the world of FX hedges in the COVID world today. So that is the session of by Madhav is going to be held tomorrow, and Sarthak during the week. So I would highly recommend you to hear about that. I wouldn't like to take away their pointers currently. So wait for that, and they'll answer. Any other questions? I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much, Avni. I've got a very good feedback saying that it's been a very informative session. The object was to make it simple, and it was 100% achieved. Thank you so much. Oh, I have got a very good remark from Deepa also. Thank you so much, Deepa. And thank you everyone else also for listening, because I really appreciate all of you. For me, I was committed to give you everything in very simple way. I wanted to make dal chawal exactly sound like dal chawal and not some nice lentils with rice. So I tried doing that, but kudos to you for listening and being patient with me. And I'm really looking forward to having you all with the IYEA family. And I really hope that you all attend the coming sessions also for the rest of the month. Thank you so very much. Oh. I'm getting so many complimentary chats from Ayush, from Raj, inspirational, thought provoking session. Thank you for the great session. That really means a lot to me. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope to see you soon in future.